Welcome, everyone. My name is Leslie Kirby, and I'm the chair of the Jewish Community Relations Committee through the Jewish Federation and Jewish Foundation of Nashville and Middle Tennessee. And this Lunch and Learn today is co-sponsored by the Nashville Jewish Social Justice Roundtable. I'm delighted to welcome as our guest today, Carole Westlake, who's the Executive Director of the Tennessee Disability Coalition. And Carole is here to talk to us today a little bit about intellectual disabilities and an update on the Purvis Payne bill. Welcome, Carole. Thank you for being with us today. Can you start off by just giving us a little overview of yourself and what led you to the position that you're in with the Tennessee Disability Coalition?
Thank you. I'd be glad to do that. Thank you for having me, Leslie. I'm really delighted to be here and to be able to talk to you all a little bit about disability, about the work of the coalition, and in particular, the work we're doing right now, trying to pass a bill that will help to save Purvis Payne from execution and hopefully others as well. So really delighted to be here. A little bit about my background. I have been at the Disability Coalition for 30 years. I am its founding director. We celebrated an anniversary this year. And I came to this work essentially through special education. I started out as a special education teacher and did a variety of things, started working with families of children who had disabilities and really kind of caught an advocacy bug. I mean, understanding that systems don't always treat people the way they should. And that the best kind of work I could do would be to walk with parents, walk with families, walk with individuals with disabilities in order to build more inclusive communities. So that's really kind of how I got my start. And it is work that I am very passionate about and am happy to share with you. What I will try to do is share my screen. What I'd like to do today is just share a little bit about the coalition and the work that we do. We are not a not-for-profit organization that spends a huge amount of time sort of promoting our brand in the community because we're kind of focused singularly on disability and on supporting families. But so I would like to share a little bit about the coalition and what we do, and then move to Purvis Payne and the death penalty legislation. So let me figure out my screen sharing here. I love that you all have captioning. Thank you so much for doing that. I mean, that really helps build an inclusive community, by the way. I don't know about the rest of you, but sometimes it really helps me to have captions. When I'm watching television, I'm kind of British mysteries. I'm like, what are they saying? And captions help, but it certainly helps people who have hearing impairments, one thing and another. So I'm going to kind of go over and make sure that I can switch you're looking at our coalition logo, which has, I think, a sort of, if you can see that sort of stylized geese. Years ago, we adopted a logo that said, and a motto that says, the lifting power of many wings achieves twice the distance of flying alone. And I think you probably have heard the story of geese gets shared in business periodically, about how geese fly in flocks with one in the lead who might drop back if they're tired and somebody else takes the lead. And that's really the basis on which we formed the coalition. We are an alliance of about 40 different disability groups. Both large and small. Some of them are disability specific. So, the Council for the Blind, the League for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, or the Bridges program, but all the folks who want to work together, whether it's disability specific or whether it is a professional organization that works in disability, but trying to figure out ways that we can sort of lift everyone and make sure that our communities are accessible. This will show you just a little bit about our staff and our board and groups of people who really want to build communities that value, support, and include people with disabilities. So all the time, we're trying to make sure that people with disabilities are at the center of what we do, and that they are taking the lead in what we do. So our staff has a majority of people with disabilities who are employed with us, and or family members of folks with disabilities. Our board consists of people who have lived experience in disability, because we also say that there shouldn't be anything about us without us. You really, if you want to know how to accommodate disability, if you want to you ask somebody with a disability. They're used to doing it. They've done it for a long time. So that's really sort of the values that we have and the things that we do. So just a little bit about disability and who we represent. we always say that we don't care what you call it or when you got it. The presence of a disability in your life represents some unique challenges sometimes. People face unique barriers, face unique discrimination at times. Interestingly enough, in Tennessee, almost 1 in 3 adults has a disability of one variety or another. I mean, if you're using the Americans with Disabilities Act definition, and it might be because of illness or injury, a chronic condition. It might be something that you were born with, but it's pretty astonishing. So we really talk about the fact that we are a minority, but we're a pretty heterogeneous minority, and we're a pretty big one when it comes right down to it as well. So as you can see, the national average is about, 1 in 4 people have a disability, but in Tennessee, it's a little bit higher than that. And that translates into literally about almost 2 million people in Tennessee who have disabilities. So it's a big job and something that we take on. Not all disabilities are visible. Obviously, we think about wheelchairs, we think about sensory disabilities, we think about intellectual disability, but disability takes many different forms and affects people in many, many different ways. And we try to be really cognizant of that in doing our work. So let me tell you just a little bit about what we do. We say that we operate programs, we work in policy, and we have purpose. It's sort of our 3 Ps. So we engage in a number of programs that support people with disabilities and their families, and that's really direct work that we do. But the core of our work is really on working on public policy, whether it's state or federal, whether it's administrative or in the legislature, to try to make sure that we have an enabling government, enabling structures in our communities that support people with disabilities. And then we focus on our purpose, which is really to make sure that people are included, that people have meaningful lives and are able to have what we all want to have, which is a decent place to live and meaningful work to do and the support of our family and friends. And that's just very fundamental. And that can be really hard for folks with disabilities. And so that's really where we focus our purpose. We think about civil rights, we think about social justice, and we think about meaningful inclusion as we do things. So let me tell you a little bit about our programs, just kind of gives you a little bit of a sample. We have a Benefits to Work program. We kind of brand things specifically where we work with, there are 300,000 adults in Tennessee who are on Social Security disability for one reason or another, are not able to work, but who want to work. 90% of the folks we know that are on disability say they would like to work, but they have barriers to work. Sometimes they can't work or don't want to work because they're afraid of losing their health benefits, their Medicaid or their Medicare. Absolutely critical. If you can't stay healthy, you can't keep your job, right? Our Benefits to Work program helps them work out ways that they can get more economically self-sufficient without losing things like their health insurance benefits by using the work incentive programs that are in Social Security and a whole range of things. So helping people get to work, helping people to build their lives that way. We have a brain injury program that works all across communities, both with professionals and individuals. Traumatic brain injury is the leading cause of acquired disability in our state. And you can imagine, automobile accidents, again, kind of whole range of injuries. In children, bicycle accidents. So wear those helmets, very, very important. But making sure that folks have adequate prevention and then adequate recovery services when they have a brain injury is part of what we do. And the last program I just wanted to highlight is a program we call Family Voices of Tennessee. And that really is a program, it's a peer-to-peer program. We hire parents of kids with complex medical needs and disabilities to provide support, training, and other kinds of services to other parents who have kids with complex medical needs. As you can imagine, you join a club you didn't ask to join when you have a child and something happens. And being able to talk to others, being able to have some help navigating those systems you didn't ask to be a part of is really important. And that's what our Family Voices program does. So that just kind of gives you a little sense of what we do in terms of program. In terms of policy, We are very active. Last week, we had 600 people from across the state who participated in a town hall meeting with what we call Disability Day on the Hill. Generally, we actually bring people down to the Cordell Hall building, down to the state capitol to visit with their lawmakers, to talk about the issues that are important to them, and work on particular legislation that would make a difference for people with disabilities. This year we were virtual. And let me just say that it's a lot easier to manage 600 people on Zoom than it is to manage 600 people down at the Cordell Hall building. I said to everyone, well, at least you didn't have to park this year, which is always the challenge in downtown Nashville if you are there. So we work to organize families. I think some of the pictures you're looking at are some families who were working on a program called a Katie Beckett program, a waiver that we worked on the legislation for last year. No, 2019. See, I've lost this year of COVID. I want you to know. I just think that whole 12 months is gone. And this program allows families who make a little bit too much money to have their child on Medicaid, or middle-class families who have kids with complex medical needs to get access to some of the extra services that Medicaid provides that private insurance doesn't provide. Really important program. We were the last state in the union to adopt that program that has been permissive since 1984. So we're really proud of doing that and proud of the families who really worked with us to make that happen. This is just a demonstration of our Disability Day on the Hill. And then obviously our purpose, I hope this slide sort of, reflects the folks that we serve. Again, any age, any disability, doesn't matter how you got it. People who have this experience, standing together and being able to build a community is important. So that's kind of my short speech on the coalition, but you really wanted to hear about Purvis Payne and about intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I grabbed this picture of Purvis from the Innocence Project website. So thank you to the Innocence Project. I think some folks are on. And I think that they are really much more able to speak to some very specific things around Purvis Payne. And if you have questions, I'm sure that they will do that. But Purvis Payne's situation really brought the Disability Coalition and our partners to the table to really think about, again, policy and what we're doing in this state to protect people with intellectual disabilities. And Purvis Payne is a perfect example of that. He is a man who has been on death row for 32 or 33 years at this point, convicted of killing a mother and her young daughter in 1987. He has always maintained his innocence. He is an individual who has an intellectual disability. I think there's no question of that. He has a history of intellectual disability. We can kind of talk about how those things look. He says that he didn't commit the crime, that he was an innocent bystander. He tried to help. That created problems. I think that, the Innocence Project will tell you that evidence disappeared, that there was evidence that wasn't tested, that the district attorney in the Shelby County area fought to avoid DNA testing, that thing which these days we know is really effective. Purvis Payne did not have a prior criminal record. He was living with an intellectual disability, but he was sentenced to death in Tennessee. This is a very pressing issue. He was scheduled to die in December. Governor Lee got lots of pleas for clemency from a lot of us, including the Disability Coalition. He has not answered those, but he did provide a temporary stay of execution for Purvis Payne. That stay expires on April 9th. So we are up and coming on this very important issue for him. So I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about the death penalty and individuals with disabilities, because I think Purvis Payne is really the perfect example of the fact that we do need a policy change in our state. The first thing I'll tell you is that you need to know is that the Supreme Court of the United States and the Tennessee Supreme Court have already clearly ruled that it's unconstitutional to execute somebody with an intellectual disability. Oops, I dropped intellectual out of my title. Sorry about that. I did these things quickly. Intellectual only at this point. And this slide gives you a few examples of court cases that helped to solidify that unconstitutional ruling. Atkins versus Virginia in 2002 was really the case that where the US Supreme Court said it's a violation of the 8th Amendment. It's cruel and unusual punishment to execute somebody with an intellectual disability. In 2010, a Tennessee case pointed out that just having a hard IQ score, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is not sufficient to say somebody does or doesn't have an intellectual disability. How you define it, how you determine intellectual disability matters, particularly when someone's life is at stake. And so that Coleman case made a big difference. In the Keene case in 2012, it was pointed out that Tennessee lacks a procedural mechanism to allow people who are already on death row to demonstrate that they have an intellectual disability. And this is really the place where Purvis Payne has landed recently. He has a history of intellectual disability. That issue was not brought up at his trial. The trial certainly took place and he was sentenced to death before the US Supreme Court banned the death penalty for people with intellectual disabilities. It would be unconstitutional to execute Purvis Payne, but there is not a way right now in our Tennessee courts for him to go back and get the court to take a look at his intellectual disability and determine that he is a person with an intellectual disability and that he cannot be executed. So that's one of the things that we're really trying to work on with the legislation that we're working on now. So just to give you a quick sample about why it is unlawful, people with intellectual disabilities of all varieties just have less capacity to understand what's going on. I think, you know, people often break this down to, do they know what's right and wrong? And certainly, you know, I know Steve Smith, and Steve Smith has Down syndrome, and he certainly knows the difference between right and wrong, right? And it's not as simple as that. You know, people with intellectual disabilities are often easily manipulated. They want to please people. They want to tell you what you want to hear sometimes because they're just trying to get along in the world, right? And they're used to being instructed and trying to do what others ask them to do. They really are oftentimes less culpable. They cannot analyze a situation the way you and I can analyze a situation, and that makes a difference. They are often manipulated, you know, by evil forces, or sometimes they are set up for certain kinds of things, right? I mean, I know I've watched this in schools where kids with disabilities sometimes, or intellectual disabilities, take a fall for something that somebody else did because they kind, you know, another kind of bully kind of knows they can make something happen. There are those things that go on. When the Supreme Court took a look at death penalty cases and people with intellectual disabilities, they pointed out that because of their capacity, their lack of capacity, they really do have more limited culpability than others. And they went on to say that people are less able to give meaningful assistance to their defense, for example, and that oftentimes their communication skills or their demeanor, you know, the way that they present to others is not what we're used to, and people make assumptions about them based on the way they react to situations when they don't react the way the rest of us do. There's just a whole myriad of reasons why it is completely inappropriate, as affirmed by the Supreme Court, for people with intellectual disabilities not to be executed. The other thing that you need to know is that in 1990, and I'm actually proud of this, you know, sometimes, you know, for those of us in Tennessee, it's kind of like, you know, we think, thank heavens for Alabama or Mississippi because we're generally last in everything. I will say that I am proud that in 1990, Tennessee actually by statute banned the death penalty for people with intellectual disabilities long before the Supreme Court found that it was unconstitutional to execute people. I think that's important, and I'm proud of our state for doing that. If you think about the timing, though, the murders that Purvis Payne has been convicted of took place in 1987, and he was convicted and given the death penalty before Tennessee banned the death penalty in 1990. And that's one of the reasons why he's in this place where he needs to be able to get back into a courtroom to prove that he has an intellectual disability in order to be able to save him. And there's not a mechanism for doing that at this point. And that's really one of the reasons that we're working on this and trying to move forward to do that. So thinking about Purvis Payne and sort of saving him, because that is the impetus, and others, may I say briefly, they're probably, it's estimated by some of the abolitionist folks here in Tennessee that there are probably 5 or 6 other individuals who are on death row in Tennessee who have a history of intellectual disability, but don't have a way to get into court to make their case that they have an intellectual disability. And so the legislation that we're working on, if we are able to get it passed, would help that small handful of other folks who are similarly situated to Purvis Payne, who we think that the state would unconstitutionally execute if they are not permitted to demonstrate that they have an intellectual disability. Reasonably, they could try to demonstrate that, and the court could find otherwise, could find that they don't have an intellectual disability, but we think that they deserve a way to do that, and that's what we're trying to work on. So in terms of the things that we have been trying to do as a disability community, and as a social justice community, I think a couple of things. I mean, one is there have been a lot of calls for clemency. There was a large writing campaign to try to make that happen before the governor put the stay in place that expires April 19th. I think that is still an important thing for all of us to do. We have to pursue absolutely every avenue. I would like to think that this governor, who considers himself a religious man, would understand why it's a really bad idea to do what he is, or to allow to happen what will happen if he does not intervene. So I would encourage folks to continue to move for those calls for clemency for Purvis Payne. Again, we've talked about the stay of execution. We are hoping that we can get this legislation passed before that stay expires. It's important to know that it doesn't mean that he will be executed on April 10th if the stay expires on April 9th, but it could. I mean, it could be scheduled very quickly or not. And so that date is just really, really important. And then finally, we're trying to work on this legislative solution. And this is a political solution, and there are realistically some challenges. Although I am cautiously optimistic. We have not had a single vote yet on our legislation in either the House Criminal Justice Committee or the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is where those the first vetting of this bill will be. There are actually 2 bills moving forward that would do similar things. One was brought by G.A. Hardaway, who's a representative African-American man from Memphis, and co-sponsored by Brenda Gilmore from here in Nashville. It is a good bill. It would probably it would help to save Purvis Payne. The challenge of that bill is that we have a supermajority Republican legislature, and with a history of not passing bills that are sponsored by 2 Democrats, and that's just realism. I will tell you, the coalition is a completely nonpartisan organization, but there are some realities about the way things work. So the bill that we brought as a coalition from the disability community is really focused on those 2 things. One, how you define intellectual disability, and modernizing that in our law, which was passed in 1990. It has a kind of an old-fashioned definition of intellectual disability, which includes mostly an IQ. And what we know is you need to include adaptive behavior and other kinds of issues as well in terms of people's capacity, and which also would create this path forward in order to for Purvis Payne and others to be able to have their day in court around their intellectual disability. That bill is being sponsored by Representative David Hawk, who is from the Greenville area up in East Tennessee, and is sponsored by Senator Todd Gardenhire, who is a senator from the Chattanooga area. Both of them have a very strong reputation in protecting people with disabilities in a variety of ways. And we feel really strongly that we have a real chance to have some success. But we need to move as quickly as we can. So I think that probably I guess the last thing I'll share with you, because I really love the fact that social media has played a role in this now as well. On the 10th of March, just not very long ago, Martin Luther King the third did a big tweet. There was a big sort of on TikTok and all the places I don't go, Instagram and Twitter. There really is sort of a national movement to try to help save Purvis Payne. Communities of faith have been really important in that. And I think that that is something that we all really need to pay attention to. I think there is a lot of doubt about his guilt, but from a disability perspective, we have been able to try to take this on simply as a civil rights and a social justice issue on behalf of people with disabilities, which I think is sadly more palatable for some folks than other kinds of arguments. So it takes all of us to make a difference in the world, and we can make a difference for one person, we can make a difference for a lot of people, and that's what we're trying to do in this situation. So Leslie, I think I'll stop there and take questions, or I would be interested in people's discussion about this issue.
We've had a few questions in the chat during your presentation, so I'm going to go back and make sure we grab those. I'm going to deal with the bills first, since you just talked about those. So okay. I think you gave the names of the sponsors, but do you have the numbers of the bills in case people want to contact their legislators?
And I do have those numbers, and you know what, I'm gonna take it on. I think I know them, but if I don't read them off, yeah. Yeah. So the bill is House Bill 1062, and that is David Hawk's bill, and the companion is Senate Bill 1320 with garden hire. So that would be
great. Thank you.
We would encourage you to support.
All right. And then one question came in around the Supreme Court ruling, and does it supersede individual state policy? I mean, we know technically it does, but sometimes states try to wiggle around that.
Yes, how interesting. Well, and that really is one of the things that we're facing with how you define and identify somebody with an intellectual disability. So our state statute says that you have to have that a person with a disability, intellectual disability, excuse me, is somebody who it manifested before the age of 18, that you have an IQ of 70 or below, and that you've got some adaptive behavior deficits. Well, that was a contemporary definition in 1990. But what we know, and actually what the Supreme Court has ruled, is that, an IQ of 71 doesn't mean you're not intellectually disabled. It simply means that you're on the cusp there, right? That there are other factors that have to be considered and a whole range of things. So that's Supreme Court ruling that says you have to use sort of the modern definitions and the modern technology and medical science about intellectual disability does count in our state, but our code doesn't match it. And that creates some confusion. And that's one of the reasons why we want to modernize that code. But what the Supreme Court says does supersede what states do.
There was also a question about timing. So do you feel like it's realistic at this point that the legislation can pass and take effect in time for Purvis Payne?
I think I am hopeful. I think the legislature wants to move quickly if they can on a whole range of things. They want to get out by the end of April. I believe that if this is moving forward and if we can get it through one of the chambers, either the Senate or the House, that the governor will not schedule an execution quickly. I don't think he's, well, I can't speak for the governor. I was going to say I don't think he's excited about the execution. I think that politically he will be cautious if he knows the legislature's moving.
That makes sense. And it sounds like you're working on other fronts as well, trying to put pressure on the governor's office too. Okay. somebody asked to share the names of the committees again.
Yeah.
So it's the Senate Judiciary Committee
It's
and
the
the
Senate
House.
Judiciary Committee and the House Committee on Criminal Justice.
Okay.
Yeah, you can go to the General Assembly website and see and click on those committees. They'll give you a list of the folks who are on those committees. Happy to have you email.
I think we do have a couple of people from the Innocence Project on the call. Haley, or if anyone else from Innocence Project is here, do any of you want to speak a little bit about this particular case before we talk about disabilities more generally?
Sorry, I'm eating as we're talking.
Oh, sorry. I should have warned you.
No, you're fine. I'm not sure I have too much to add. Thank you. I actually am only 2 weeks into my job at the Tennessee Innocence Project. So the folks that are helping Purvis Payne are from the Innocence Project out of New York City. So while we just formed 2 years ago as the Tennessee Innocence Project, we are not directly connected to the case aside from knowing it's going on. So I'm sorry, I can't share too much, but just excited to be here.
That's quite all right. A question came in about Purvis Payne, and was he labeled with an intellectual disability when he was in school? Did he have an IEP or anything like that?
So he is too old to have had an IEP. You know, the issue of special education and individualized educational programs, the federal special education law protecting the education of kids with disabilities of all varieties passed in 1975 and was implemented in the years subsequent to that. So Purvis Payne was really out of school before that happened. He does have a history of, I will say, what they used to call slow learner. You know, he was not able to read when everybody else was able to read. He really struggled in school. There is a pretty strong written history of his having an intellectual disability. I don't know that there's necessary, and because I don't work that case specifically, obviously, and I should probably say I am not a lawyer either, by the way, people. It's like I'll try not to answer legal questions, but there's clearly a history of having an intellectual disability, even though I'm not sure there's a medical record of his intellectual disability.
Got it. People are welcome to keep posting questions in the chat, or I think it's probably manageable with these numbers for you to unmute yourselves as well. So a question came in, does Purvis comprehend the situation and what's happening to him? Do you feel like?
And that's probably more an Innocence Project question than mine, because I don't know Purvis personally. It is my understanding that he certainly does. I mean, his intellectual disability is not so severe that he doesn't know what's going on. Do you know? I think he knows that he is facing death. I think it is telling that he is somebody who's always professed his innocence, and that the evidence that convicted him is pretty shaky. And there have been a lot of things that have happened that have been difficult. I think, sadly, he does know what's happening. I don't know how much he knows about how much people are trying to help. I hope he does. So.
There was a follow-up question just about his school record. Linda, I'm not sure what you're getting at there. If you want to unmute and clarify.
Yes. So I do, I work in a school, you know, and we have a school psychologist, but I've talked to, how old is Purvis Payne?
He is 54 or 55.
Okay. So I did talk to someone about his age who said that he was in special ed throughout his school year. So, and so something like that, or slow learner, or his school records would indicate that he would have some kind of learning disability. And certainly his teachers would probably note that, or, you know, whatever they called it back then. I mean, if he should have been in a special ed class and they didn't put him in one, I mean, somebody should be able to talk to that.
Yeah, and I think that is the case, as I understand it. Mhm.
All right.
Judy has her hand up.
Oh, go ahead.
Just wondering, what are the things that we could do to help move this along?
So, I mean, I really think that it would be helpful if you have the ability to talk to your own senator and representative, letting them know that you know about this and encouraging them. I mean, I've got to get it through committee, right? But then I also have to get it off the floor of the Senate and the floor of the House. And so, you know, calls or emails to those two, to the Senate committee and to the House committee would be helpful. But talking to your own legislators about this as well, to make sure that they understand that from a disability perspective, this is the right thing to do, would be a great thing.
And it looks like Shayna posted in the chat, apparently there's a Jewish activist group, Never Again Tennessee, that's trying to work on this as well. And so she's listed her contact information here. If you're interested, you can reach out. Shayna, do you want to say anything else about that?
We've just, you know, like there's a lot of other activist organizations that are concerned about this. I think maybe, you know, it is about disability, but it's also that Purvis Payne was, you know, is a Black man who was accused of doing what he did as in a way that was really using some of those really horribly racist tropes that get used about Black men, and especially like he was blamed on being like some drug addicted, sexual violence craved, like it's all like wrapped up in some of those issues as well. So Never Again is a activist group that works on especially the way that the immigration system is set up, that encourages sort of just incarcerating everyone who tries to immigrate, but then also working on these other ideas of mass incarceration and why that's such a problem. So that's sort of where we come at it, and we're trying to do something. We're trying to figure out how to like tie in the holiday of Passover in order to plan an action, possibly online. So yeah, if you are interested, feel free to talk to me, and also like if it comes up on your social media to share, because it's also like it's just a really grievous situation that, you know, it'd be better if more people knew about too. That's
really point well taken, and thank you. I mean, I think that's really important, and yes, and sort of tracking this on social media and, you know, resharing hashtags and stuff is really helpful, because I think that helps bring pressure. And your point is very well taken about the racial overtones and all of this, and it's not something that from the disability perspective we spend a lot of time on, but it is there in Purvis Payne's situation, and it is pretty egregious. And it is, I mean, all of the worst things that you can think about that people use around Black men, and the death of a white woman are there. And I want to be very clear that the characterization of Purvis Payne as somebody who was a drug taker or, you know, sexually overactive or any of those things are completely unfounded. They're just the kinds of things that get raised and whispered. No record at all of any of that ever. Yeah.
All right. You can continue posting questions about Purvis Payne if you would like, but I want to talk to Carole a little bit also about your broader disabilities work. So Avi posted a question earlier. Is there still a waiting list for state-supported services for people with disabilities? And if so, how deep is the list?
So there is a waiting list. If you take a look at the programs of long-term supports and services or home and community-based care for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, the waiting list is over 7,000 people long. We currently serve about 6,000 people in some waivers at the Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. There's a new TennCare program and managed care that provides some long-term supports and services for about 4,000 people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we've got a waiting list of over 7,000. And those are just the folks who get to the waiting list. You know, I will tell you that it is not unusual. All the time, we encounter parents who are in their 70s and 80s who are still caring for their 50-something-year-old sons and daughters with intellectual and developmental disabilities at home, and hoping that they live 1 minute longer than their son or daughter does, because they don't know what's going to happen. It's hard.
It is. Avi also does some work with a local organization, Our Place. I want to let him talk for just a couple of minutes about that work and the resource, obtaining resources for recreation.
They do great work, right?
Hi, Carol.
Hey there.
How are you?
I'm well.
I've had the fortune to hear you many times, and I so appreciate your work.
Thank you.
I wanted to address two things. I asked a question about waiting lists because there's so many people in our state that are strapped without service and really have to house their individuals in home without much support. And in relationship to other states, Tennessee is woefully behind in providing services for this population. The two areas I wanted to mention, one is how little social and recreational opportunities our people have. In many states, mine home state, Illinois for sure, we offered incredible opportunities for people with disabilities to be included in the community and do something other than bowl. And our park district is the one that is supposed to provide those services, and they provide very little. What they provide is excellent, but the scope of what they provide is extraordinarily narrow. So many of our people with disabilities are really stuck at home. They have no other options. The one other place that they are woefully woefully neglectful in is providing independent housing for people with disabilities. They can't live alone without supervision. And in other states, there's plenty of opportunities for people to find independent living with supervision. In Tennessee, there is almost nothing for anyone other than the very poor. If you're very poor and get on the waiting list at 7,000 deep, like Carole pointed out, you have to sign up almost from birth to get on this list. If you don't sign up from birth, if you wait till your kid is in high school, you're never going to get services for them as adults. So someone has to tell these families, sign up early. And then hopefully when your individual is of adult age, they can get served, they could move up the list to get help. But I wanted to tell you guys about Our Place Nashville. Carole, you know about Our Place.
I do.
We operate independent living for people with intellectual disabilities, and it's affordable housing. We can provide individuals with an apartment with full utilities and computer access and everything for about $350 a month. That means if you're a school teacher and you want your individual to have their own housing, we can provide it for you at a rate you could afford to cover. And we provide also supervision. So we run 4 friendship houses now. We have 4 more that are going to open up within the year. And we have another 4 that are going to open up in 2 or 3 years. And a friendship house is usually 20 apartments, 10 of which are people with intellectual disabilities, 10 of which are people who we call companions, who we also give affordable housing to. In exchange for affordable housing, the typical people serve as oversight for our people with disabilities. Take them shopping, have a cup of coffee, have a communal meal once a week. And so we're the only game in town for people who are not poor enough to be served by Rochelle or some of our other sister agencies that cater to the people who are really on federal assistance. If you're a school teacher, a fireman, a working class person, we're the only game in town right now, basically. And here's what we need, and maybe you all can help us with. we have a waiting list too for people with intellectual disabilities that want to live in our places. And we're trying to get rid of that waiting list by opening up new facilities. What we have come up short with, and it's amazing when you think how many people need affordable housing, where we come up short with is finding companions to live with them in our facilities. When you think we're offering a companion a brand new apartment, fully furnished, all the utilities and food and all kinds of other pluses, and we are having trouble finding people that need affordable living that will live with our individuals. So those of you on the call, if you know someone in need of housing, affordable housing, if you can help us find people, we give them a wonderful place to live in exchange for just 8 to 10 hours of help a week with our people with disabilities. So the two things I think the Jewish community can step up for and raise their voice is independent housing for people. And Adam has helped us with grant money, connecting us with grantors. And the second one is we need to raise our voice that this community needs to provide more services for people with disabilities that live at home. You know, think if you could drop your kid off in an evening to do things socially and recreationally with peers, their parents also get a little respite. They rarely do. So I'm just putting a plug into our good hearts on the call. Find me some people that will live with our individuals, and let's all raise our voice for more services to these people.
Thanks, Avi. Linda added a question. Do you need more men or more women?
We need both, and we will take people. We need both. And right now we're looking at, we've been using divinity students at Vanderbilt who are here for 3 years, and we've been using them as our companions. But with COVID, most of them have returned home and are taking classes remotely, and we have empty spaces. So right now we've got about 10 units that we could fill immediately. And we're looking at senior citizens as our next cohort group. We've been using graduate students, but think of senior citizens that need affordable living that would serve as wonderful companions to our people with disabilities.
Avi, you got a couple more questions. Are there other requirements, age requirements or anything?
Only requirement is that the companion is nice.
Okay.
That's all we want is nice people who will treat our people with disabilities kindly, will even pick up a phone if they're running a fever, and their parents ought to know.
All
We're
right.
just looking for nice people to live with our people with disabilities.
And then Renee asked, where are the homes? So what parts?
Most of them around the Chestnut Hill area, but we have scattered sites. We work with nonprofit developers. They provide the bricks and mortar. We provide all the oversight. We also do work placement, work training. We provide social activities. We take our people out in the community, but they're really scattered around town. But most of them are off in Nolensville, like in that area around. It's really nice neighborhoods. But they're more working class neighborhoods. Imagine some people in some of our upper class neighborhoods don't want our folks in them. You know, they just think we'll bring down their property value. So we go where we can.
Judy, did you have a question?
Yeah, would expanded Medicaid funds that are now rejected by our governor help in any way for any of these issues?
Well, I can only speak for our people, Judy. That's a great question. Brian Hale, that you all met in a recent call, he's providing free health service for our people. So our people have been tested, have had their vaccinations, and Brian's been our source of go-to. I think many of them would be eligible for Medicaid expansion.
Yeah. Medicaid expansion would help some. There are folks with disabilities who would be able to get onto Medicaid if Medicaid were expanded. Additionally, if Tennessee took on Medicaid expansion as offered by the government, it would improve our federal match rate. And that means that would free up more money to serve more people, and we could address the waiting list. And the state says they want to do that, figure out ways to save money and address the waiting list, and yet they reject things like Medicaid expansion, which would help make that happen.
The only other caveat, it's what a shame that 7,000 people are in need of help and our state can't facilitate them getting the help that they deserve and need. It is really, in the Jewish world, Carole, we call it a shanda, a real shame.
Yeah, it is.
So a question for both of you, and Carole, I'll start with you. Once people are vaccinated, do you need people to volunteer? We have a volunteer portal that we run in our community, and we have lots of people who want to help and volunteer. So are there kind of boots on the ground type things that you need?
And that there are some boots on the ground kinds of things that would be helpful once we open things back up again. I mean, we're trying to be very cautious, around doing some things. But I think that there are some opportunities to help with some transportation for folks. We have some partner agencies that we're working with that our senior ride, for example, that helps people with disabilities and seniors who need rides, the volunteer drivers to help people get places, because that's a huge issue in our community. It's just one example, but we got to get the pandemic under control first, and then we can do that. But I'm sure that our place has some opportunities as well.
And Avi, to you, in addition to needing people to live there, are there needs for people to come and volunteer a few hours a week?
You know what, I'm going to check on that and let you know. Right now we are small in staff, and our companions take our folks out and about, but we are running to the point where we're building faster than our staff can handle. So we're at a point where we're going to need volunteers, and I'll get a handle on that. But I will get back to you on that.
And I would just say, and obviously this is probably true. I mean, one of the things about having an intellectual developmental disability is that you don't have ways to make friends and social contacts the way the rest of us do. And so, honestly, I would say that likely volunteers would be welcome to go and engage in social activities with folks, along with the companions, along with everybody. Just building for all of us, building a social network is what keeps us safe and happy, right? And so volunteers who will just help become friends, I think, is really, really important.
That's a great point. Carole, I'm going to ask this to you, though, Avi, you can chime in as well. Is it true that people who live in spaces like our place are lowest priority in terms of qualifying for group homes and things like that? And she also asked about students who are going to age out when they graduate.
The really challenging thing is that there aren't a lot of priorities. There's just not enough service. I will say that we were successful, and for good or ill, a number of years ago in passing some legislation that requires that the state hold open some spaces for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities whose parents turn 80 or are over 80. So that is sort of a priority. There's kind of like a placeholder for that. And so I think it really is a challenge for younger folks, right? Who might be graduating from school, one thing and another. Avi's point is very well taken. Parents can't wait until high school to begin to plan for their sons and daughters. And that's true for planning for employment and transition into real life, as well as a place to live and a whole range of things, because it's not a simple process, and there's not just something out there ready, when that happens.
I will add one thing. Places like our place, we serve people who are not at the very extreme of the spectrum. Because to live with us, you have to be able to take care of your own personal needs, be able to make some life decisions. You have to dress yourself, you have to be able to cleanse yourself, make yourself a meal, because our places have full kitchens. So we're dealing with that profile. But if you're a parent of someone with a much more severe intellectual disability, you are really stuck. Think of Boo Radley in To Kill a Mockingbird. You keep your individual at home. They have no peer opportunities to meet other peers. Our park district should be providing these opportunities. It is not. And our people are secluded, not included. And this is not a good state to serve that population. I'm sorry, Carol, I know all the good work you're doing. But when I compare it to Illinois, and I should not, it's a carpetbagger again. You guys are sick of me doing that. But the truth is the taxpayer ponies up and pays for services for this population. Our taxpayer is not asked to do that.
I don't take offense. There are a lot of really good people working really hard, a lot of families who are organized. We make little tiny progress, but this is a very difficult state. I very frequently get calls from people in other states who say, so, I've been offered this job opportunity and I'm thinking about moving my family to, Tennessee or one thing or another. And, and I have a son and he gets, 80 hours a week of personal assistance at home and this, that, and the other thing. I'll be like, don't come. And they'll be like, no, you don't understand. I'll be like, no, you don't understand. we don't offer that here. And I always say to people, we are, a low tax, low service state. Right. That's it. And that's a decision that the people of Tennessee and the people who they elect have made. And it's painful if you have needs. And so we will continue to try to build a community that values, respects, and includes all of its members. But it's a little bit hard sometimes in this state.
And Leslie, I would add that this is a wonderful space for our Jewish Federation to enter into. Adam's doing some really good work within our community, but this is a population that no one else is attending to. How wonderful it would be if it became a population that our Federation targeted.
Great. Linda, did you have another question?
Let's see. Did I write something? I can't.
Oh, no, it's just your hand thing is still up on your picture.
Oh, sorry. No, that was from before. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. I'm going to call, I know we're running a little bit short on time at this point, but I want to call on Renee Kassman. She's going to talk just a little bit about an event that happened around Purvis Payne at the Temple a couple of weeks ago. And it sounds like there's still an online discussion that people can participate in with the attorney involved in the case.
Hi, Carole, this was wonderful. And we were actually introduced to you from Reverend Stacy Rector.
Oh, yes.
She came to the temple and we had an excellent panel discussion on this. And I just wanted to let people know if they want to go back and listen to it, it is still up on the templehub.org under previous events. But we actually had the sister of Purvis Payne come and speak on his case, Good. As well as Kelly Henry, the public defender. Good. That will be working on this. And they're the ones that told us about the legislation and about you, Carole. This was wonderful. So thank you. And our community will follow up on this legislation.
Certainly. Thank you.
For sure. All right. If there are any final questions, people can unmute and ask them, but otherwise we're drawing up on 1 o'clock. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Carole, thank you again so much for joining us today. You're doing amazing work, and Avi's right. This is an area where our community, I think, can be good allies in terms of helping out with this. Just a note for those on the call who are regulars, we won't be meeting next week or the week after due to Passover, and then we'll be back. Deborah, is it? Do we have a date?
We are off for next week and in preparation of Passover, the week after for Passover. So we'll be back April 9th. All
right. And Erwin, who's not able to join us on the call today, wanted me to do a little bit of a shout out. Both Adele's and 404 Kitchen are offering delicious sounding takeaway Passover meals during Passover. So if you want to not cook one of the nights and have a nice Pesach meal, you can support local businesses as well. Carole, thank you again for joining us today. Such important work, and we really appreciate your time and educating us about these issues.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Very good to be with you.
Thank you, Carole. It was
Thanks,
great
everyone.
to meet you.
Shabbat Shalom and happy Pesach, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.